Welcome back to the Plan Your Federal Retirement podcast. I'm your co-host, Micah Shalansky, and with me, as usual, the amazing Tammy Flanagan. How's it going, Tammy?
Hey, Micah, I'm doing great, and I'm happy to be once again ready to talk about some important information for federal employees planning to retire.
I love it. Yes, it is so good to kind of go through this. And one of the things that this episode came from is, I think one of the benefits that we bring to the community, Tammy, and this maybe it's my ego speaking, so somebody please let me know, but we get the privilege of meeting one-on-one with federal employees. And so we see real things that come up, right? And so Tammy and I get like boots in the ground in the trenches, working through these things. That's where we come up with some of these things that says, hey, this is a common theme we're seeing. This is a mistake that we're seeing. And now we got to raise our hand and we want to share it to the entire community of saying, hey guys, we're kind of seeing this trend. Let's look at things a little different. How to improve your retirement.
That's right. Yeah, it is funny how things seem to multiply all of a sudden. Like you're seeing a couple of these situations just one after the other. And I'm not sure why that is, but we do get to see little kind of paths and trends that are happening in this world of retirement planning for FERS employees. Sometimes it's dealing with Social Security benefits, or sometimes it's dealing with the TSP. So we have these three different distinct benefits that are governed and managed by three different distinct agencies. So that's a recipe for potential disaster, right? So we got to make sure that we know what we're doing and we understand how to do it smoothly. It's as smooth as possible. It's like carrying around a ticking time bomb. You want to make sure you keep it nice and steady. Don't rock the boat. Don't make it go off. So if you can keep it nice and steady, it'll be a smooth transition and you won't have any disaster.
I was going to say it's like a hot cup of coffee, right? We want to enjoy it slowly over time and not spill it on ourselves. But a ticking time bomb is a slightly different emphasis on the importance of keeping that steady.
I've been watching too many episodes of Blue Bloods and Monks.
Oh, there you go. Well, Tammy, one of the things, this came up from a meeting. I was meeting with a few new clients and kind of working through some things. And cash flow, we talk about all the time. It's just so critical to understand cash flow to be able to retire successfully. But one of the things that kind of came up, which is interesting, sometimes it's the forest through the trees, right? We're so into details, too many details. We're diving into this too deeply to really see where we're going. So one of the things that I often encourage clients to do, and Tammy, I think you're the same way, but let me know. I never look at clients' expenses when they're getting ready to retire.
Expenses are going to change anyway after you retire. So, you can't really predict when the roof is going to need replaced. You can't really predict. Every month you're going to have a disaster, just like you do now. The car needs new tires. Just when you think you're caught up, something else happens. So you have to look at, you're living on your paycheck now, at least I hope you are. Mm-hmm. So whatever you're bringing home and putting in the bank, you make that work. And if that's working now, why change it? Why not try to get used to living on that same amount, allowing for future inflation? Maybe if you're lucky, even have a little extra so you can have some fun in retirement. Isn't retirement supposed to be a little fun? So I think I like to work with somebody's net paycheck and convert it to a monthly amount, because all of our retirement benefits are paid monthly.
Yes.
So we can look at that monthly income that you're bringing home. Let's see how close we can get to that with your monthly net retirement income that you got 3 different checks. You only have 1 paycheck, but you got 3 different retirement checks.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, right? And so where do I see people go wrong with this is they come in and say, like, I've detailed out all of my expenses and we spend $11,000 a month. And I'm like, okay, but I'm looking at their pay stubs and they only bring home $8,000 a month. They're not in debt. They have money in savings, right? So it's like, okay, you're not overspending, but they're racking their brain, Tammy, because they're like, hey, I got to replace $11,000 a month and I don't see how this is possible. So the first thing we got to do is step back and say, okay, how much do we bring home every month? And they're like, no, that's not the question. The question is, where do I spend my money? And it's like, look, here's the hack from a financial advisor. If you don't have debt, you're increasing your savings, you don't have a spending problem. I'm just not worried about it, right? Yeah. Now you come in and you're $60,000 in credit card debt, you're rolling one card to pay the other, your home is max finance, you have car debt, etc. This is a spending problem, right? We have cash flow issues there. But if that's not the case, you don't have a spending issue. And so I'm not going to spend my time there. What I want to spend it on is understanding how much money we have coming in. And this particular client, very smart, good guy, engineer, broke down all of his expenses. But what he did, Tammy, he put in there payroll taxes. Okay, well, when we're retired, we don't have payroll taxes anymore. And by the way, payroll taxes come out in your paycheck. It doesn't affect your net pay. Well, it affects your net pay, but it doesn't affect what goes in your bank account. He put in his TSP contribution. He put in like all of these before tax deductions that all go away at retirement time. So that's the reason. Now it's complicated to say what goes, but I have health insurance now, but it changes a little bit in retirement, but I still have it. And that's a little bit harder of a conversation. A simpler conversation, Tammy, is I love what you said. What goes in your bank account every 2 weeks? That's where we're going to start. We're going to make that a monthly amount. Then that's the goal we need to shoot to replace.
Yeah, and it's a lot easier to do it that way because the withholdings from a retirement check are just a few, mainly just taxes and insurance. So once we know the gross amount of our retirement, we can easily deduct some taxes from it. We can easily figure out the monthly premium. All of our insurance premiums are paid with after-tax dollars in retirement, unfortunately, but it does make it an easier withholding, so we don't have to figure out what's the tax benefit there. Which, by the way, if you're married to a federal employee and one of you is going to retire and the other spouse is going to keep working, why don't you let the spouse who's going to keep working take over paying for the health insurance because they get to keep paying for it with pre-tax dollars. I just thought of that. Popped into my head.
No, I love that. And that's again for like tandem or dual federal employees. You're both federal employees is where that works, right? If one's a Fed and one's in the private sector, that doesn't work the same for survivor benefit reasons. Yeah. So Tammy, let's go through that, right? We talk about it first, your net paycheck. What comes in every 2 weeks? Now, if you ever come in and talk to me, there's a couple of things I always want to know. How much income do you have coming in? How much do we have in our bank account? And what big expenses do we have coming up? Now, sometimes clients are going to be like, Micah, I gave you my pay stub and I gave you my bank statement. Why are you asking me about this? Because it's an awareness question. If you are not aware of how much income you have coming in, you are not aware of your bank account balance. If you are not aware of how much approximately a month you're spending, you're making poor spending decisions. Now, I'm not picking on you. I am equally as guilty of this. When I take my eye off the ball, I overspend every single time. But when I'm just aware of where my money comes, I'm aware of my bank account, I'm aware of my income, I make better financial decisions.
That's true. Yeah, when you have a limitless supply in a credit card account, you just don't pay as much attention as to where that money's going until you get the bill. And it's like, oh my goodness, I didn't know I spent $10,000 last month.
Tammy, you're so kind. I never say that. I'm like, who spent all of this money? But it's my credit card. But yeah, that's the question, right? So the awareness of it is absolutely key. And that's one piece of it. Then the second piece, Tammy, let's spend a little bit of time on this one. This is more of the federal employee side, is you have to know how your pension works. Because the other mistake that I see, and you and I were just chatting about it, I know you see it too, is clients will come in, prospects will come in, they're like, Micah, here's my federal annuity supplement, or here's an estimate, excuse me. And they're looking at the gross of how much is going to come in. They look at that. There's three numbers. They have the gross pension, they have the survivor benefit, and they have the supplement. Sometimes they add them all together. That's not how it works. But other times they're just looking at those gross numbers. But Tammy, that comes with a problem, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, big problem I have with the retirement estimates that the agencies have wonderful software. They do a really, really good job of computing the gross annuity. In most cases, every once in a while, you'll see something left out, but usually pretty good. But then when you're looking at the reductions, do they know if you're going to elect a survivor benefit? Do they know if you've had part-time service? Has that been factored into it? Do they know that you have a former spouse who's getting 50% of the marital share of your retirement? So you want to make sure you're taking into account anything that might reduce that gross. Because the good news is those reductions reduce your taxable income, but the bad news is it reduces your income. So, you got to be aware of anything that might cause a reduction. And then you got to take out the proper withholdings. How many times have you seen a retirement estimate for $6,000 a month and the estimate says you're going to pay $150 a month in taxes?
That's what I was thinking. Yep. And it's like, no, that's actually not how this works.
No. And then they live in a state where the state taxes, and there's no mention of state tax on that estimate.
Right.
Yeah. So you got to figure out federal income tax, state income tax, and then insurance. And a lot of times the estimates will show your health benefit premium on a monthly basis. It might even show your life insurance withholding and perhaps dental and vision. So you've got all those insurances that you have while you work. You're going to keep paying for those at the same price in retirement, but with after-tax dollars, not before tax.
So, Tammy, what I like to do is look at this or explain it like, why does the HR get it wrong? And I get this question, right? And I don't mean to blame the HR on this one, by the way, but it's hey, Micah, I filled out my W-4 and I said, hey, use the same W-4 for retirement. They're withholding enough taxes today and I'm getting a refund. Why, when I retire, do they not withhold enough taxes? Like, what happened? I told them it's the same thing. And what happens is every place that sends you money looks at that W-4 and it says, okay, how much money are you getting? Then it assumes that's your total income, your only income that you're getting. And so all of a sudden you get your income from 3 different sources now, right? The feds, you got your pension, you got your TSP, you got Social Security, and each one of them says it's your only income. They don't withhold enough taxes and you get stuck with a bill, potentially penalties at the end of the year. And so those are things we want to avoid.
Yep, that's true, because people who don't make a lot of money pay a lot less in taxes. So if your only source of income is 1/3 of your retirement, you're going to be in a much lower tax bracket because they don't know you have 2 other sources of income. So you got to do, like we've been preaching all along, is this tax planning is so important because you've got to be aware of how much income you have that's subject to tax. You got to be aware of how much income tax is going to be withheld. And a lot of people I meet, you might meet this too, think that their Social Security benefits have to be tax-free. After all, I already paid that FICA tax for 35 years. Why do I have to pay tax on Social Security? But a lot of our audience will pay tax on at least 50% and more than likely 85% of their Social Security check will be taxable.
Yeah, you get a little bit tax-free, right? Which is kind of nice, but it's virtually all taxable unless you've done something different in order to get below that. So we really got to understand this tax game. And then we're comparing apples and apples. We're comparing net to net. And that's what we're trying to do in this conversation is what is my net income coming in pre-retirement? What is my net income going to come in post-retirement? And how close are those numbers? And now if they're super close, well, then awesome. If they're not super close, then okay, we have a gap. What's the plan to fill that gap? Now, this is where the TSP or your other investments can come in. This is where part-time work could come in, but we got to start coming up with a plan for filling that gap.
Absolutely, because there is going to be a gap. Because if you're trying to live on just your FERS benefit and maybe Social Security, that really was never meant to be your only retirement income. Your savings are considered part of that 3-tiered system. So you got to figure out how much of those savings are going to be needed to make ends meet, to make life worth living in retirement. You want to have a comfortable lifestyle.
Amen. Those are things are really, really important to kind of look at, right? And that will take care of the spending. Now, Tammy, I want to get a little bit back on the spending. This is another question I get for retirees as well. This is, Micah, look, I have my retirement income. It replaced my other income. I get that. But how am I going to afford these big expenses? I'm going to need a new car. I'm going to need a new roof, right? I'm going to have these other replacements that come in. And so how do we think about those? And kind of the first question I'm going to come back with is saying, okay, if you had those expenses today, what would you do?
Yep. Do you have money set aside? That's what we do in retirement. Maybe this is another tip for others, is that we have, a couple of retirement checks coming in because we are partially retired. At least my husband is. I don't know that I am, but he's got a Social Security check. He's got a government pension check. He's got savings. So we set aside one of those checks. He's under the old system, so his Social Security check's really small. So that goes into a separate bank account. So that just sits there and it keeps accumulating every month so that when we need that, like tomorrow, the guy's bringing a new dishwasher for us. We got that paid for out of that little slush fund that we have set aside. So that money kind of accumulates there, just like you do while you're working. You set aside money for a vacation, or you set aside money because you know that next year you're going to need new tires on the car. So you have to plan ahead for expenses, just like hopefully you've always been doing.
Tammy, that's what I was going to say right there. Hopefully you've always been doing, right? So what are you doing now? What I know is the more similar we can keep things moving into retirement, the easier that retirement transition is. There's already enough mental stuff. We got to do a whole other pod on that one. Mental things to kind of go through when you're getting ready to retire. We want to keep the financial things working. If you were working really successfully and you had a sinking fund, if you're putting away money every single month, then awesome. If we replaced your same net income with your name net retirement income, you should be able to do that same thing. So let's keep those great habits you've built over 40 years and let's bring those into the next 40 years in retirement as well.
Yeah. And sometimes like we do, you have to put it somewhere where you're not seeing it. Set that extra money aside, even if you got to take an allotment out of your retirement check to set it aside in a separate account and mark that as your emergency fund.
Mm-hmm.
Because you still need it in retirement. I hate to tell you that even though you just bought a new car, just remodeled the kitchen, something else is going to go wrong in the next 5 years.
Something else will happen. Tammy, I love that point. So I always ask clients, all right, where do you currently bank at? And then whatever bank name they give me, when we're talking about the savings fund, I recommend a different bank. And if it's for what you just said, I like it out of sight, out of mind. And I know we talked about it before, but we have this, what we like to call our financial thermostat, right? When I log on and my checking and savings account at my bank are between X and Y, I feel good. When it goes above Y, I feel really good. And I start spending money, it goes below X. Then I'm like, who spent all my money? Right? And I'm like, quit spending it. And then we build it back up. We have this financial thermostat. So a great hack is set up an account at a different bank that you don't normally see. That's where that money goes. I like the online banks or online credit unions. They pay high interest. It's easy to set those accounts up. Capital One, Marcus Bank, Immigrant Direct. There's a ton of them that you can go and look at to set those up.
Boy, I just thought of a good guest we should have on the show sometime is a psychologist, because I think there's a lot of psychology with retirement. In fact, I don't know if you even know this, the TSP has hired a social scientist.
No, I didn't know that.
Why does the TSP need a social scientist? Well, because they know that there's certain people that aren't saving 5% in their thrift. So the social scientist did an experiment to see what's going to get them to save the 5%. And they sent letters out to the people who aren't doing it with 3 different strategies. One saying, well, everybody else is saving 5%. Why don't you do it?
Right.
One didn't say anything other than, you have the option to do this. And the other one used some other strategy. And they could see clearly which one psychologically got more people to jump on and start increasing their contributions. So if you didn't think psychology was dealing with retirement, you got another thing coming, because it is.
That's 100%. When younger people are saying, hey, Mike, I want to be a financial planner growing up, what should I take in college, right? They're looking for what math classes, they're looking for what econ classes. And Tammy, take psychology.
Is learn how you think if you're the one planning your own retirement, because you know your weaknesses, what gets you going, right? So I think it's really important. I think we should do a whole thing on this. And now that we're talking about these different things, little tricks we can do, because we're playing tricks with our mind to help us get on track or help us do the right thing.
And it's the whole self-awareness thing, right? We all have different ways our brain functions. And when I'm aware of that, now I can steer myself in a good direction with things versus getting into bad habits. So, and that's what all the hacks are, right? I use 2 different bank accounts because I know, like most people, they'll overspend in certain situations. I'm going to create a hack to make sure I don't overspend. There's nothing wrong with that. Right? So we want to get all of those tools in your favors, all those arrows in your quiver to make sure you're set up for your retirement.
Set up for success. That's right.
I love it. Well, Tammy, this podcast is all about action items, right? And our listeners to take the information to be able to implement it right away. So I'm going to kick it over to you first. What's a good action item our listeners could take away this week from the pod?
Well, try to figure out what that monthly net income is. You know what your paycheck is. You know that it's pretty much the same every 2 weeks unless you just got a promotion. So figure out what is that net income that you're trying to achieve in retirement. And then start estimating your first basic benefit, your Social Security benefit, and then figure out how much will you have to take out of your thrift to make life comfortable. And is it going to be too much? Maybe that means you got to adjust your retirement date.
It is, but these are things, man, Tammy, you nailed it. You want to know beforehand, right? You got to adjust your retirement date. You don't want it the opposite, that you retired and figured out you don't have enough money. Those are not fun conversations.
No.
And then, Tammy, I'm a huge fan of having different savings accounts, or like buckets of accounts. I'm a big buckets fan, right? Our listeners know. And so I would say, if you haven't done this already, create an account at a separate bank. I love nicknaming these accounts. What it is, what's it for? How much is it for? And when do you need that money by, right? And this really helps in the marital harmony things, right? Making sure you guys are on the same page of what you're spending money for. I love the idea of one emergency account, but if you think emergency is X and your wife thinks it's Y, you're going to have a marital conflict, right?
That's true.
So let's define what these things are and make sure instead of just in our minds, we're on the same page with it. And if we have something that's not fitting in my 911 account, my emergency account, roof repair, okay, great. It says, roof repair, 25,000, 2030, right, is when I need the money for it. And you say, Mike, it may not be 25,000. Okay, it may not be, but if I got 25,000 going towards it, that's really going to help me, isn't it? So what are these numbers and how are we setting it up? But set up those sinking funds, set up those different savings accounts. It's a great hack to get you set up for retirement.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's an important thing that we should all do. And that's just planning. That's just simple planning. And these things aren't hard. Don't complicate it more than it needs to be. So I think this is something people can take and make some use of.
I love it. And this podcast is all about taking action. So make sure you grab one of those and go and do it and share this podcast, right? We want your feedback. If you're watching us on YouTube, thank you so much. Smash that like button. Give us some comments inside of here. It really helps it grow. Tammy and I's goal is to help transform the retirement information for federal employees. We want to empower you with the retirement you've worked so hard for and deserve. And you help us spread that message by sharing this with other federal employees. So we really appreciate that. Tammy, anything else to add?
I think that's enough for one day, right, Micah? We got a to-do list. We've got some marching orders. So let's get busy.
I love it. Well, thank you guys all. And until next time, happy planning.